And I would say one of the things that it intrigues me is Amazon doesn't really have a research and development department. Their culture is built around every employee should be looking at their job and seeing how they could do it better. Again, one of my principles is make complexity simple. And so what steps can be removed from even the smallest process? And that becomes every employee then becomes your research and development department. And part of what's interesting is that's one of the keys for promotion at Amazon, coming up with a better way, pitching it, getting buy-in, and then often the person who comes up with the idea actually becomes the project lead for whatever that is. And so kind of internal development and and culture of being rewarded for coming up with good ideas.
I'm John Wright, and you're listening to Affiliate BI, the business intelligence and affiliate marketing podcast brought to you by Snapstrong.
Welcome to the Affiliate BI podcast. Today we're chatting with Steve Anderson, who's the author of The Bezos Letters, and he's also the co-founder of Catalyst. Steve is a true business analyst focusing on the fine balance of growth and risk. Steve, welcome to the show.
John, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being on the show.
I haven't read your book yet, but I've seen it before, so I'm actually excited to dig into it. I want to ask your story about how you got the idea to start the book, besides the obvious, which is, of course, you naturally have dug deep into Jeff Bezos' letters. So I want you to share your story.
Well, there is a story behind how I kind of discovered them and did the deep dive into them. And it really comes out of my work in the insurance industry, which is what my career has primarily been. And the last probably 35 years focusing on technology for independent insurance agents. And we all know that technology continues to develop, and hard as it is to say or even think, faster than ever, right? I mean, with even the last months. And so, uh, given that background, I started asking the question, is the biggest risk insurance agents face actually not taking enough risk? And that was sort of a core idea that I kept kind of marinating in, and started looking at companies that had once been very successful and literally are gone, and companies that have been successful and continue to be successful, and tried to begin understanding what's the difference. What makes one company longer term successful and one company literally slide out into oblivion. And again, the names we sort of know. That's where I came across Amazon, and I kind of say now, of course, but I think at the time, this was probably 5 years ago, maybe a little more. At the time, I it was obvious Amazon was successful, but not as obvious as to why. And so I came across in my research the letters to shareholders that Jeff Bezos wrote. First letter was 1997. That's the year they went public. And the last letter that he wrote was 2020 when he stepped aside as CEO and went into executive chairman. The book goes through the 2018 letter because that was the most current letter when the book was published. And what I realized is when I sat down and read the letters in order as a narrative, almost 50,000 words, a book, I realized there were threads through the letters. And most shareholder letters are boring and tout the company, right? Or the CEO, how great they are and blah, blah, blah. Bezos did some of that, but not a lot. He did a lot more of how he did it. What were the things they put in place? What were the problems they encountered and how did they solve those problems? And, I do think Bezos will go down in history as one of the, certainly one of the most successful CEOs, and taking a company from literally who knew you could buy books or even wanted to online to the what it is today. So that's kind of where it came from. And I will tell you, the book idea didn't come to until a little bit later. Um, I was intrigued with the letters. I was intrigued with his thoughts. And I thought, okay, this is really good information. I should put together a lead gen, PDF, giveaway, give me your address, typical marketing stuff. And fortunately, I showed it to my wife, who's in the book business. And she said, "Oh, no, no, no. This is not a lead gen. This is a book." And I kind of pretty much went, "Oh shit." Right? As a book is a whole different animal. And I had been writing my entire career, articles and write all kinds of different stuff. But a 1,500 word article and what ended up being a 65,000 word book are two entirely different things. And so, um, fortunately, it was, published, ended up in Wall Street Journal, USA Today bestseller list. And maybe even more surprising to me, it's been translated into 20 languages.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I've actually read a few of the letters myself. I think I've seen some articles that probably talked about your book and then they've actually dug into it.
Yep.
And for me, I felt it was maybe too high level. Like maybe I didn't dig deep enough in there. But what would you say are some of the patterns of success for any company? I mean, not everyone could be Jeff Bezos and not everyone could be Amazon. But what are some of the things that when you start studying good and bad companies, like are there signatures on the people side as well as strategy?
Well, I would say, and again, so, the full title is the Bezos Letters 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon. So there are 14 principles and there's a whole story behind that. That, so that's a lot. I'll just say that. But I do think there are some kind of key pivotal principles that apply to pretty much any type of organization. And over the last few years, I've heard from a lot of different ones who, CEOs, nonprofits, I mean, all kinds of different types of business. And I always like to say, especially if your audience is a small business owner, whatever that might mean, remember Bezos started as a guy in a garage putting books in packages and driving them to the post office. Now, obviously, you scaled, and it took, 26 years to be where they are today. And you may not even want to grow like that, but there's still things they did that set up that success again for long term. And so, the first principle is what I call encourage successful failure. And one of the key threads in the letters was this idea of failure being a good teacher. And successful failure is not a term you hear very often. How can a failure be successful? Well, it can be because what do you learn from the failure? And so Bezos' mindset is we have to experiment. If you do an experiment and you don't fail, it's not an experiment. So you have to be willing to fail if you're going to do experiments. And what he calls, what his phrase is, you experiment and invent on behalf of the customer. And in order to do that, you've got to iterate, change, fail, learn, that whole process. And again, I think that's something that is good to keep in mind. And I also want to say, an objection I hear often is, well, look at Amazon now. They can afford to spend, millions of dollars and fail. They couldn't when they were small, just like any other small business. But they still had that mindset of we've got to experiment to see what's going to work and what's not going to work. If it doesn't work, we get rid of it. And so when people talk about Amazon today and like they're shutting this down or that down, that's part of the experiment. It didn't produce the results they wanted. And so they're willing to cut it and then learn from it and move on to something else. And a lot of times, things that are very successful today at Amazon that we all know were failed experiments until they succeeded. Prime's a great example. I mean, shipping, right? So they had all kinds of iterations of shipping. And, if you buy $25, you get free shipping. If they went through various iterations before they got to what we now know as Prime 2 day, 1 day, 1 hour shipping, depending on where you are. So that's one that just sticks out for me because especially coming from the insurance industry, it's very counterintuitive because everything about insurance is mitigating risk, reducing risk, transferring risk to an insurance policy. It's not a risk mindset. And I think that, especially back to what I said earlier, when technology is changing so fast, you don't have time to sit back and try and wait and see.
I guess I'm going to summarize this from my point of view of being a SaaS company is kind of like a mixture of doing things, whether it's failing. And it's kind of like if you're spending too much time spinning your wheels, I guess this is the whole analogy. I mean, it's easy for someone like you to look at someone and go, you're clearly spinning your wheels. But I think if you're not trying any of these experiments, it's like nothing's really getting done and you don't have this feedback loop.
Right. Exactly. And one of the comments I make in the book is that I don't believe employees are afraid of failure, but they are afraid of the consequences of failure. So that part of the culture built in the organization is, and again, this is not stupid stuff. I mean, this is not who cares. Let's just see what happens. This is intentional, strategic, well thought out, and it's still going to not work sometimes, maybe more times than you want.
And then I'm going to pivot to, because I mean, we're talking about investor letters. So we have investors in our SaaS company, and these ones are private, so they're probably never going to be public. But what do you think are things that investors should include, or not investors, sorry, startups should include for letters for their investors?
Well, I think, yeah, certainly you need the financials. I mean, that's kind of a given, I guess I would say. And that's my comment earlier. Most public CEO letters are that. And again, I think what made Bezos set a couple of things I think made him different. Um, and I'm thinking back to the very first 1997 letter. And again, I think this applies whether you're private and it's all internal or whether you're public and it's required as part of SEC filings, et cetera. I mean, he laid out in that very first letter very clearly his vision for Amazon. And there were several sections in that letter. One was we will focus on the customer. We will be obsessed with the customer, and our decisions will be made in light of that obsession. So that actually is another principle: obsess over customers. The other thing he said that is very counterintuitive is to their investors is if that's if how do I say this? Give me a minute. If that doesn't fit your investment mindset, then you probably shouldn't invest in Amazon. Again, counterintuitive. What do you mean? Get it, but being very clear on the vision and again, Amazon lost money for probably the first 10, 15 years and lots of press about that, right? Amazon.com and et cetera, et cetera. But the third area that he emphasized was a long-term vision, meaning we will make decisions based on long-term ideas, long-term vision of where we want to go, which means in the early internet days, it was a land rush, right? The people who had the most customers who could grow the fastest were the ones who ultimately won. And even in SaaS, their AWS stuff. I won't call it an accident, but they didn't set out to create AWS. They set out to solve an internal IT problem, which is every division, department had their own team and they were duplicating resources and programming and all that kind of stuff. And Bezos said, no, we're no longer doing that. In fact, he said, I can't remember what year now, early, he said, we will have connections and we will have central repository for services. And all of a sudden, somebody thought, actually, I think it was probably Andy Jassy, who ended up being CEO of AWS before moving into Bezos' position. He said, there's going to be other developers who don't want to spend money on infrastructure. And the whole SaaS, I'm a little prejudiced, but the SaaS industry was created because of that particular thought. So anyway, I don't know if I directly addressed your question, but I think casting that vision as CEO, as C-suite, whatever that looks like to your investors and making sure as much as possible that they are in alignment with the vision that co-founder, founder, whoever has for where that business should go.
This is good feedback for me because I'm literally working on it. And if my investor newsletter tonight. Shifting a little bit, because I know you do, I think it's insurance agency consulting, and
Yes.
combined with your understanding of growth versus risk, how would you advise a SaaS company knowing when to exit when one of a couple things could happen? Either the market changes on you, like, I mean, I'm sure we've got the blockbuster, or it's kind of like, what about security? Because I mean, that's also part of the insurance equation.
Oh, yes. We like to sell cyber insurance. So, so when do you exit? Gosh, I think there's so many factors that go into that particular decision. I think a couple things that come to mind. One is, it is, what do you see as the future? And are you paying attention to external trends? So you mentioned something changes, business changes or, something like that. And one of the things that Bezos said was that paying attention to external trends is a key differentiator between those businesses that are gone and those that stay because they are more adaptable. And as you grow, it becomes harder and harder to pivot, to change. You know, we've been successful. If I could point to one reason Kodak, BlackBerry, Blockbuster, Comp USA, you pick them, were gone is an unwillingness to change and pivot what was their cash cow. And sometimes that's not possible, right? And if you're not paying attention to those external trends, then you will be behind, not ahead. And again, if you look at uh, Amazon in terms of how many industries have they changed because they saw something coming and got out there early, experimented, failed, got something going, and kept building upon that. And there are all kinds of examples. I mean, healthcare right now, they continue, and this is a multi-year thing. And that comes back to that long-term thinking, which is another principle, right? And not, I think one of the biggest issues, at least for Bezos, was we will not adhere to Wall Street quarterly earnings, short-term thinking. We will think long-term. And he got pounded for that thinking. Ultimately, I think you could say he proved them wrong. But, again, and so even for me, I'll give you a little, in my little tiny world, a little small company, it's not big, co-founder, CEO up until mid last year. And as you can tell, I'm kind of on the other side of my career or the downside. I don't want to say the downside quite yet, but, and I told my board that, I will do this as long as I'm still having fun. And I think that's important too. Hustling just to hustle, I mean, gets really old, I think, for me. And that was part of my decision. I didn't like the day to day. I like the ideation. I like coming up with things. I like creating, but not the day to day kinds of stuff. And so I'm still involved and I'm still doing more of that than the day to day. I would call it grind, but the day to day stuff needs to be done really well, but that's not me.
Well, if I ever think about exiting, we get offers occasionally. I'll come back to this episode and change my mind.
Look at it again. And you don't have to read the whole book, but I think, there are certain chapters. So every principle has a chapter to it, and there may be some interesting things there for you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll wait for
So,
you.
yeah. I wanted to ask, do you think the role of a business analyst is perhaps the least understood and maybe one of the most important around?
I do. I haven't thought of it that way. So that's an interesting question. When people say I'm a business analyst, really? What do you do? Sit around and, look at stuff all day or, whatever. But I think that's perhaps the place that new ideas can come from or new thoughts can come from, meaning, I wonder if we did this or do we do we have to do this still? I know we've done it for 5 years, but have things changed? And so asking those questions and then creating small experiments, and to get to test some of those ideas. And then if you're seeing some success, continue to moving forward. And I would say one of the things that it intrigues me is Amazon doesn't really have a research and development department. Their culture is built around every employee should be looking at their job and seeing how they could do it better. Again, one of my principles is make complexity simple. And so, what steps can be removed from even the smallest process? And that becomes every employee then becomes your research and development department. And part of what's interesting is that's one of the keys for promotion at Amazon, coming up with a better way, pitching it, getting buy-in, and then often the person who comes up with the idea actually becomes the project lead for whatever that is. And so kind of internal development and culture of being rewarded for coming up with good ideas.
Now that's interesting from where I sit because I interviewed someone on the podcast who is part of an affiliate program software. And I said, if you had to put together your affiliate program today, who are you hiring? And the answer he said threw me off. He basically said, I'd get a business analyst as the first person. Now, everyone I know in affiliate marketing, that's not the first answer. Like that's not even a thought. It's
Right.
actually, no, you get your affiliate manager and then they basically create the program and you're copying and pasting what everyone else has done. His answer was like analyst first, then the affiliate manager. And the analyst is basically educating the affiliate manager going, these are the things I need to look at. And I think you should look at them too.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So what could businesses do more of to set themselves up for success for 2025 and beyond?
And again, I'll go back to one principle that was coming to mind. That's almost what I started saying, but I think the question will lead me into it. Um, Another area of those companies that are no longer here was decision making. And Bezos has a lot to say about decision making at Amazon. And he describes it as one way and two-way doors. And what he says is, or type one and type two decisions. What he says is that type one decisions are made by every business, but very few decisions are type one. Type one decisions are big, bet the farm, huge. Do I exit? I mean, that would be a type one decision. And what he says is those decisions need to be made with as much information as you can gather and by top level people, if not the CEO, whatever that looks like, and um, probably with a gut feeling part of it. So data and gut, but those are few and far between. He says as businesses grow, they tend to add layers, managers, supervisors, whatever, regional directors, whatever that looks like. And he said that bureaucracy slows down growth. Now, type two decisions or a two-way door are the everyday decisions, basically. And he said, frankly, those decisions aren't that consequential, even though they may look like it at the time. But he said, those decisions should be made with at most 70% of the information you wish you had, which I think is an interesting phrase, right? Not that you have, that you wish you had. Um, and they should be made quickly by the lowest level person or group that has the skills necessary to make that decision. And he said, if that decision is wrong, back to the successful failure culture, if that decision is wrong, you can do a couple things. You can just stop it, you can pivot, you can do something else, and that doesn't slow down growth because now you look at, okay, why did we make that decision and think it was a good one, but it ended up not being a good one? And so you start learning more and more about the decision process and about success and failure. So
No.
I think that, I mean, bureaucracy is hated at Amazon and they have a couple of tools that they use. One is called the two pizza team. So a team is only as big as what two large pizzas can feed, typically 10, 12 people. And and again, long story, I won't go into it, but the bigger the team, the more complex the communication becomes and the slower things happen. So if you have small, now you might have for a project, you might have 10, 15, 50 teams, but each responsible for a particular piece. The other thing they did is early on, 2004, Bezos banned PowerPoint presentations in meetings. So no slide orientated presentation. Because what he said was people could throw bullet points on a slide really quick and easy and not think through exactly what's there. And he said, when you present that way, it just leads to sloppy thinking. In place of it, he required everyone to write a maximum, what became a maximum. It took a few years, 6-page memo, literally a written out memo that started with a future press release. What's the press release when this new service, this new product, this new platform, whatever it is released to the public? What's the advantage to the public, the customer, and the key points of the service? So that's first. So you have an idea in your mind of the end point, and then FAQ. What are the questions everybody's in that meeting is going to ask? And you try and figure out all those questions and you provide an answer to those questions. Now, here's what's unique. That memo is not passed out before the meeting. It's passed out at the meeting. And everybody literally sits around in a study hall, as Bezos described it, because he said executives are busy. They'll say they're going to read it. They won't. So we'll just carve out the time. So everybody literally is on the same page. Now, quick personal story. When I was pitching with this new company that I helped create, we pitched about 15 potential investors, and I did the 6-page memo. It was the most excruciating 20 minutes I've had in a very long time because you're sitting there going, okay, what are they doing? And the people are making notes and, blah, blah, blah. But when I opened it up for discussion and conversation and any other additional questions we didn't address, it was such a richer meeting. And it's the whole idea of slowing down to speed up. The meeting went faster, ended up getting 7 investors out of that group, so 50%. And we were able to launch and had the funds we needed to, build what we needed to build.
So going full circle back to Jeff Bezos starting a book company, it seems like this is a pattern I'm just picking up from talking to you is that, writing your ideas down more than just like in point form, like you're kind of like you said, you've been doing writing for most of your career. I've done a lot, but I find the more I do, the more clear my thoughts get. So do you think there's like some sort of pattern here that, Bezos starts a book company? The key theme of this is writing and authorship. And I mean, yeah, he's basically done it since day one, like changing what is typically, business stuff and saying, okay, we need clarity of thought pushed through.
Yes, absolutely. And Bezos is a really good writer. And you see that in the letters. And I think that's part of what kind of captured my attention is how well he wrote. And it was something he had done a long time and brought it into Amazon. And, when he was thinking about, because the whole idea behind Amazon is this internet thing, right? 1995. And he thought, people are going to buy stuff on the internet. Well, that was really early for people to start thinking that way. And, again, writing out is key. And it's still a core skill at Amazon today. If you're interviewed at Amazon, depending on your position, you may be asked to write something because people want to see if you can express yourself in a written form. And the phrase I use is, I don't know what I think until I write it out. I may think something but the process of writing it out helps refine it. I start seeing, okay, that's really stupid. Let's rethink, it just really helps. And I think that's kind of that hidden gem in that process.
Brilliant.
Well,
So
and think about this. If that project fails after all of that, now you have a document to go back to and say, what didn't we understand that we need to learn from. So after action review, whatever you want to call it, you've got what you thought were the right answers. And for whatever reason, they ended up not being. So why? And what can we learn from them?
And maybe that's just getting the 70% of the information you need to make that decision.
Yep, exactly. Well, yes, absolutely. And, a lot of times they move forward, but they keep checking in to see, okay, is this still something viable? Should we still do this, et cetera? So, again, that helps them move fast, which is certainly something Amazon has been good at for a while.
Moving fast while making it seem slow, but
Yeah.
they're always making progress.
Yeah. Move fast by slowing down,
Yeah.
or
So,
slowing down to move fast, maybe the right way to say it.
and the last question is, what do you see of the future of affiliate marketing as it intersects with business intelligence?
Actually, I think it's probably going to be more important. And the reason for that, so all the AI stuff, right? I think people are going to want more and more human connection. So I think people are going to be more important, certainly. And AI does some great stuff moving, what I call soul sucking tasks off people's plate. They don't want to do them anyway. Let's figure out a better way to do that. And they want connection. So I think, again, having an affiliate that has a relationship with their audience and they become the trusted person to be able to say, hey, and you let me finish my thought. They become the trusted person for helping their clients make a good decision or exposing them to a good option that might make sense to them. And even with all of that, I've been around the affiliate world for a long time. Um, you've got some people who just want the money and they don't last long, is the way I would say it. And there are people that I have known, followed, read that I don't anymore because they violated that trust. So I think, it's important to keep that in mind and you treat that trust um, carefully, is how I would say it.
Ironically enough, I just find that there's actually not too many people writing about trust. Like, what is trust and how is this part of a business? Years, right? Like, not a lot of people have that long term vision. And fortunately, affiliate marketing, of course, attracts the short term. Like, I want to put in the least amount of time, make the most money. We all
Right.
do, but it never works that way.
Well, it might work that way for a short period of time, but probably not long term.
Yeah, brilliant. Steve, thank you so much for doing this. I want to pass it back to you to ask how can people get a hold of you? And of course, we're definitely going to include the links to the book.
So my primary social platform is LinkedIn. So you find me there, Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson Bezos, probably will pull me up. I'm a top voice there, so I tend to have a presence, I guess I would say. The book website is thebezosletters.com. And the book is available in all formats, Kindle, audio, print, on Amazon, of course, or it might still, might be at your local bookstore. And so you should be able to find it pretty easily.
I'm ordering that book right after we finish this call. Steve,
Right.
thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Now the dreaded end
The
recording.
dreaded
I
is
don't know what I'm going to be clicking on. Recording, stop recording. Stop recording this meeting will be saved in my drive.
Thank you for tuning in to the Affiliate BI podcast. I'd like to take this time to ask for a small favor to leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcast. That helps us expand our reach to rank higher in podcast directories and reach more listeners.